I don't have too much left to say because a lot of what I was going to say has already been said, so I won't bore you with a lot of the details. I was originally going to spend a little time talking about the Native American Sweat Lodge, because basically what brings me here and the work that I've done or did do a few years ago was a study looking at whether or not we could measure if a sweat lodge experience could actually have a measurable effect on people. And I wasn't looking at the technical effects of whether it was changing physiology in some way. I was going after softer measures. Would people self-report on changes in their personal self-perceptions? We used a questionnaire called the Heroic Myth Index. And it can be interpreted in a number of ways, but the Heroic Myth Index really does help to give a sense of whether people are feeling empowered, whether they have a sense of self-efficacy, whether they have a sense of a feeling of a future within their lives, among other things. It's an instrument that has some debate over how you actually interpret it. But we chose to interpret it along very traditional native lines, which was to really look at whether or not it measures aspects of spirituality. If you look at it within the traditional Native American context, healing begins with the spirit and moves from there to the body. And the whole intent was to start to try to demonstrate that sweat lodges were, as an alternative form or complementary form of medicine, that we could actually show that there was a healing component that took place, and that this had an impact on people's lives. The interesting thing, by the way, my PowerPoint has nothing to do with my studies, so I'll just keep talking.
Just keep
and if
talking.
you don't
It's coming.
it's okay.
It's
So
coming.
anyway, the whole idea was that where was I going with this? That healing
Attached to the spirit, to the...
yes, that healing starts from a spiritual basis, okay? The other part of it is that I wanted to be able to show that this was different than if people took the same kind of measure in a very neutral activity. So what we did was I'm in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary, and I got a group of some 40-odd social work students to take the Heroic Myth Index as a measure at the beginning of their research class. And I deliberately chose research because it was so dull, so boring, and so analytic and up in your head that there was no way that anybody could interpret the content of the class as influencing people's internal lives. Research just doesn't do it. So, and then after the class was over, they repeated and did the measure again, and there was no difference between the before and after class. And I'm very good. Now I'm off to the races. My control group shows no change. Now the question is, can I get my experimental group to show change? And the experimental group was people who came to sweat lodges of their own doing. So this was purely the subject pool of people we recruited at the beginning of the sweat lodge. And what we found was that we could actually measure a statistically significant difference in people's self-perception of themselves along spiritual dimensions between the before and the after. And I have tried a couple of times to get money to not only repeat this study, but to take it further. I've been stopped because of the question that came up earlier, which is how do you get money for something that is of some real contentious political issues? And part of the political issues, they are very prominent up in Canada, to some extent in the States, but not so much so. But it is that Native people don't want you doing research on their sacred ceremonies. So that's first of all, as well as they don't want you doing research if they're not involved. Well, I got the research involvement from the Native community, but I couldn't get the makers and shakers who are involved in providing the research dollars to go along with it. So the plan is still in place, but I just haven't found a way to move it forward. And my interest in moving it forward is to both, again, repeat the measures of self-improvement. I don't think we're going to see measures of physical healing. I think that takes place over a successive number of sweat lodge ceremonies. Really interested to hear tomorrow about measuring devices that people may wear. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But then, don't forget that sweat lodges, and this is where the bulk of my presentation was going to go, is that sweat lodges within a traditional, what we call in Canada Aboriginal, or you call them, you know, my native friends just say in Indian country. In Indian country, sweat lodges are sacred ceremonies. Okay, and so we can't talk about them in the same way that we can talk about a sauna experience. There are common elements, and I'm very interested in looking at what the common elements are. There's a purification part of a sweat lodge ceremony. It starts with, first of all, taking sage and burning sage in and around the entire lodge to purify the lodge of all spirits before anyone goes into the lodge. The smoke is, there are prayers said before the fire is lit. There is a sacred, depending on their tradition, but there is a, if you will think of it as a circle around the lodge, which is really part of that's the ceremonial space. So when I did my study, I made very sure that I worked with the elders to work out that we were not collecting data inside the ceremonial space. So we had actually both, and the space was, the ceremonial space was both geographic in terms of how far it spread out away from the lodge and the fire, okay, and that we would not actually recruit people in that ceremonial space, nor would they fill out any questionnaires in that ceremonial space. The ceremonial space was also temporal, so that we stopped asking people to participate when it was within a half an hour of the ceremony beginning. And then at the end of the sweat lodge ceremony, it doesn't stop when you exit the lodge. It stops after the ceremonial feast that accompanies the sweat lodge ceremony. So we didn't do our final data collection until after the ceremonial feast was over. So we established a protocol wherein we honored the sacred ceremony. It's kind of like saying you don't follow somebody into confession to tape record what they're doing. And so you have to use that kind of analogy in understanding that sweat lodges are sacred ceremonies. And yet at the same time, I think there's a really important dynamic and a really important healing component that exists that can be used by other people. Native people are very ambivalent about sharing this tradition, and they're justified in their ambivalence. Don't forget that the whole ceremony was banned for almost 100 years. And the places where it was conducted well away from other people and well out of sight, so that you have someone called a firekeeper who not only keeps the fire, who not only shuts the door to when you go in into the lodge, but opens it afterwards. But what was the real importance of the firekeeper? Was it to keep the fire? The fire kept burning, well, or you know, to slow. What was the firekeeper for? Anybody know? He was the warning person, just in case the feds were coming along. So that the firekeeper was also kind of the guardian of the lodge in case there were any authorities coming along.
Excuse me, is this what?
That's my home turf.
Okay, because we can try it now, but it was,
that's my home turf, okay? So actually this is very close to where I have some property. It's on original sacred Aboriginal land. But this is really literally where the mountains meet the prairies. So you can literally drive up to them. It's just the most amazing feeling in the whole wide world. And come on.
Oh, Hold on.
That doesn't go forward.
Hold on.
Oh, there it goes. And this is my sacred place where I go in my head when the snow's 3 feet high. When I speak, step back? Oh.
I think he just wants, he wants to see the slide.
Behind you can't see the screen.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, and some of this you've seen before. And some of this you've seen before. And you know, Aboriginal sweat lodges are depicted in a number of different ways. But this is probably the picture that comes closest to me for representing the experiences that I've had. And I have been in numerous sweat lodges. I've been in ones that have Cree traditions, ones that have Blackfoot traditions. I've been in a sweat lodge out in New Brunswick that is a Mi'kmaq tradition, which goes back hundreds of years. They were among the first to be colonized. But you can see from here, there's actually, between the fire and the lodge itself, there is a sacred line. And that line is either spread with cedar or tobacco, and that forms part of the ceremonial circle, and then you do not cross from one side to the other. Most of the time, I'm used to sweat lodges the ones that I'm familiar with are mixed. You can have single sex sweat lodges, but for the most part, the ones I've been in are generally mixed, with women sitting on one side and men sitting on the other. I think there's a lot of infiltration of colonizing kinds of attitudes that have entered the sweat lodge traditions, but we live now in the 21st century, so we need to deal with the fact that people move and assimilate and incorporate some of these traditions. And so what we have here now probably is close to what might have happened 300 years ago, but with a lot of modern modifications. So again, like everything, you know, there are common elements that come through all of the sweat ceremonies, okay? So you've got the wood, the water, the fire are all common elements. I wanted to point out, you were talking about rocks a little while ago, but I wanted to point out that rock that's over on the left-hand side here. And that's actually a pillow lava rock. So the favored rocks that are used, at least in southern Alberta, come from pillow lava. And pillow lava is basically comes from underground volcanoes, where the lava was spewed into water and it formed like little bubbles. And they're round and they're smooth, and they may have little little elements of some
What
mineral in them.
What rock are you looking at?
This
here?
is the
one
pillow
here?
rock, yes.
Okay, because I would imagine if the water hit that, it would just slide right off it.
No, what you don't do is you don't throw a bucket of water on, you sprinkle it on.
Okay.
And so part of the thing with the sweat lodge ceremony is the person who is leading the ceremony, and you've been in lodges, so you know this, so that the elder leading the ceremony also has to have training and guidance in how to sprinkle the water. I mean, one of the more difficult experiences I had was when someone was being trained how to sprinkle the water, and they threw it on. Oh, man.
So this is, now we're talking about like the saunameister, but
That's right.
The sweat lodge meister.
That's right. But and the other thing
Another
is
school needs to be opened up.
in sweat lodges, you will have sacred herbs that are put on the fire or on the rocks before the round, during the round. Okay, so, and it depends on where you are. So this is going to vary geographically in terms of what's used, and it stands to reason. It's going to depend on what was prominent and available in the area. That is, the top is sage. Unfortunately, there's something wrong with that picture, and it takes a good Indian sweat lodger to tell me what's wrong with that particular picture. Huh?
Cost $6?
It costs $6? Well, other than the fact that it's, no. The top one is sage, but that's female sage, and they don't use female sage in the sweat lodge, they use male sage. So, nuances, which is very important within Aboriginal circles. Okay, the tobacco that's shown here is actually cultivated American tobacco, but that in traditional circles, they didn't use cultivated tobacco. It didn't exist. So you have instead something that is pretty profuse throughout all of a lot of places in Canada called kinnikinnick. and it is a very small, low bush, and it's an evergreen, so it grows most of the year. You can pick it and dry it. You can pick it even in the middle of winter and dry it. It burns in your pipe, it burns as a very nice, very sweet, gentle little tobacco that doesn't have any of the harsh chemicals that you would find in regular manufactured tobacco, as most of us would generally think of it. I'm running close to out of time, so I think I'll stop.
Yeah, thank you. No, this is, you know, this is like the tip of the iceberg, you know. It's very frustrating because obviously every one of these things could lead into other discussions, but okay. So the important thing is that you're doing this really important research, and it is a sensitive thing. I've been told many times before I go into a sweat lodge by Native Americans, you know, act like you would in your white man's church is one thing that I'm told. And the other thing I'm told is don't go off and do a sweat lodge and call it an Indian sweat lodge without us. In other words, this is not, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but it's not a Native American sweat lodge when we're not there. And that was another important point.
I'm just going to flip, I mean, these are just pictures of the way most of it you're going to see is all these domed little structures. I would say they're not really portable. They're portable only in the sense that you can quickly put them up.
Right.
But once they're there, they stay there, and then they're used for a year or two, and then they're taken down. So they're taken down, and you might see in background pictures just the skeletal remains. A couple of things that you might not know is what's wrong with this picture. Animals are not allowed near sweat lodges because animals carry their own spirits. And the sweat lodges are sacred ceremonies and have their own spirits. Okay? And you don't want the animal spirits interfering with the other thing that's wrong here is in terms of the sweat lodges as I know them, this is a New Age sweat lodge. Okay? In typical American sweat lodges and Canadian sweat lodges, women are dressed extremely modestly. My sweat lodge garb happens usually to be an old flannel nightgown. Men usually are wearing bathing trunks. Naked sweat lodges, this is New Age, so this is modern. It's more sauna-like than sweat lodge. This may be, if it's an all-male lodge, yes, but in mixed lodges, people are always very modestly dressed. And even when it's an all-female sweat lodge, women are dressed, and always with skirts. And part of this may be, you know, the colonizing influence. So anyway, this is not sweat lodge. I only mention that, oh, okay, so that's more sweat lodge, and that's my memory of sweat lodge.
Okay, thank you very much.